Your life is nothing to be proud of, Dad. My daughter said those words to me at her engagement party, the $2.8 million celebration I was paying for. 28 years of raising her alone after her mother died, and this was her wedding gift to me. Public humiliation in front of 200 guests. But here's what Caroline didn't know when she chose to destroy me that night. Sometimes when you tear down the wrong foundation, you discover what's really been holding the structure up all along. And sometimes that foundation has been preparing for exactly this moment. This story has more devastating turns than a controlled demolition, and every floor that collapses reveals something Caroline wished she'd never tried to bury. Quick favor, if you've ever been blindsided by someone you trusted completely, hit subscribe and drop where you're listening from below. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this ends. I'm Vincent Campbell, 58 years old, and I've spent my entire adult life building things that last. Not just houses and buildings, relationships, values, a legacy I could be proud of. Started Meridian Architecture at 25 with nothing but a used drafting table and the kind of bone-deep determination that comes from sleeping in your car for 3 months while chasing your first real contract. Lost my parents in a car crash when I was 22. No warning, no goodbye, just a phone call that changed everything. Married my college sweetheart Sarah at 24. And when Caroline was born 2 years later, I thought I had my whole world perfectly blueprinted. Every detail planned, every contingency accounted for. Sarah died when Caroline was 6 months old. Sudden cardiac event that the doctors said we couldn't have prevented. Couldn't have seen coming, couldn't have stopped, even if we'd been standing in the emergency room when it happened. One day I'm a husband and father. The next day I'm a widowed single parent, holding this tiny person who was all I had left of the woman I'd planned to spend forever with. I made a promise to Sarah's grave that Caroline would never want for anything. Not love, not opportunity, not security, not dreams. I threw myself into work during the day, designing homes for young families who reminded me of what Sarah and I had planned to be, commercial buildings that would employ thousands of people, community centers that would serve entire neighborhoods for decades. Then I'd race home to Caroline. Soccer practice twice a week, piano lessons every Tuesday, homework help every single evening until she graduated valedictorian, bedtime stories until she was 12 and still wanted me to read just one more chapter. Birthday parties that were legendary among her friends, not because of how much I spent, but because of how much effort I put into making them perfect. Built Meridian into a $73 million company while making sure Caroline never missed a single school play. Never had a birthday party that wasn't exactly what she dreamed of. Never wondered if her father was too busy for her. The monthly allowance I gave her, $50,000 starting when she turned 18, seemed reasonable for someone who'd inherited my work ethic and her mother's kindness. College at Stanford, summa cum laude, full-ride scholarship that I paid for anyway, because why should she start life with debt when I could prevent it? Graduate school in international business, internships in Europe, every door opened, every opportunity funded. I was so proud watching her grow into this confident, sophisticated woman who could hold her own in any room. But somewhere along the way, Caroline started looking at me differently. She'd correct my grammar at dinner parties, her voice sharp with embarrassment when I'd mispronounce a French word, or use a construction term that her Stanford friends didn't understand. She'd introduce me to her colleagues as Vincent instead of my father, like our relationship was something she needed to minimize or apologize for. When she brought Felix home 6 months ago, I watched her actually apologize for my rough edges before I'd even said hello. Felix Blackwood, tall, polished European accent that made everything he said sound sophisticated, even when he wasn't actually saying anything meaningful. Claimed he was developing sustainable luxury hospitality in Switzerland, spoke fluently about international banking regulations and European investment law. Caroline hung on his every word like he was explaining the cure for cancer instead of hotel management theories. More concerning, she started parroting his phrases. adopting his slightly condescending tone when she talked about provincial American thinking or small-scale local businesses. The engagement party was my idea. I wanted to celebrate my daughter finding love, wanted to show Felix that he was welcome in our family. 200 guests at the Beacon Hill Club, flowers flown in from Holland, champagne that cost more per bottle than most people make in a week, musicians who'd played at the Kennedy Center. I was writing checks and watching Caroline beam at Felix like he'd personally created everything beautiful in the world. That's when she pulled me aside, away from the guests, away from the celebration I was funding, into the club's library where no one could overhear what she was about to say. Dad, you need to understand something important about tonight and about my future with Felix. The way you talk, the way you present yourself, the stories you tell about building the company from nothing. It reflects on Felix and me now. Felix comes from real success, real sophistication, generational wealth that you've never experienced. Your life is nothing to be proud of compared to what Felix's family has accomplished. Maybe you should consider staying in the background tonight and letting Felix and his friends handle the conversation. I looked at my daughter, 28 years old, wearing a dress that cost more than my first car, standing in a room I was paying for at a party I was hosting for her happiness, and realized I was looking at someone I didn't recognize anymore. Caroline, I built Meridian from nothing. We employ 400 people. The community center downtown, the affordable housing project on Salem Street, the children's hospital wing. Those projects exist because of work I'm proud of. Dad, Felix's family owns resort properties across 3 countries. They deal with European banking regulations, international investment law, sophisticated financial structures that operate at levels you've never had to understand. Building local projects doesn't compare to that kind of global impact. Global impact. This from the girl who used to bring me drawings of houses she wanted me to build for her stuffed animals, who insisted I read her 3 bedtime stories every night until she was 12, who told me I was her hero when I helped her with calculus homework her senior year of high school. I'm proud of you, Caroline. I'm proud of what I built to give you opportunities, but I won't apologize for who I am or how I got here. That's exactly the problem, Dad. You can't see past your own limitations. She walked back to the party, leaving me alone with the leather-bound books and the realization that my daughter was ashamed of everything I'd sacrificed to create her perfect life. But that conversation, devastating as it was, turned out to be just the beginning of my education about who Caroline had really become. The real shock came 3 days later when Caroline called with what she called her investment opportunity. She needed the trust fund released immediately, all $12.5 million of it. Not next year when she turned 30 as we'd originally planned, not after a reasonable review period. Right now, today, this week. Felix has this incredible opportunity in Switzerland, she explained over the phone, her voice bright with excitement and barely contained impatience. Clean capital investment in sustainable luxury hospitality. The kind of business venture that will establish us for life. But the timing is absolutely crucial. His European investors won't wait for American bureaucratic delays. Clean capital. That phrase stopped me cold. In 34 years of business, running projects worth hundreds of millions of dollars, dealing with banks, investors, and international contractors, I'd never heard anyone use those specific words, unless they were distinguishing it from the other kind. Caroline, that money was set up with very specific guidelines. Your mother and I designed that trust to mature when you'd had enough life experience to handle that level of wealth responsibly. $12.5 million isn't something you invest on impulse. Dad, I'm marrying a man who handles more money in a single transaction than you've ever seen in your entire career. Felix needs partners who can move quickly, make decisive commitments, not someone bogged down in small-town thinking and excessive caution. Small-town thinking. This from the girl who used to build blanket forts in my home office while I worked on blueprints, who would crawl into my lap when thunderstorms scared her, who made me promise to build her a house exactly like ours, when she grew up so we could be neighbors forever. The trust requires my signature for early release. I'd need to understand exactly what this investment involves, see business plans, meet with financial advisors, review the legal structure. You wouldn't understand the complexity, Dad. Felix comes from generational wealth, real European business traditions that have been operating for centuries. This isn't about residential construction contracts or local real estate development. Just sign the papers. If you loved me, you'd trust my judgment about my own future. That conditional love statement hit me like a sledgehammer to the foundation I'd spent 28 years building. My daughter, the person I'd sacrificed everything for, worked 18-hour days for, turned down remarriage opportunities for, was questioning whether I loved her because I wanted to understand a $12.5 million financial transaction. Caroline, I've never questioned your judgment before, but this is your entire inheritance we're talking about. Your mother's life insurance money, my retirement savings, everything I've built over 3 decades. It's all designed to protect your future, not fund someone else's business venture. Felix needs the capital clean and properly sourced for his European regulatory requirements. Banking compliance, Dad, international finance law. You wouldn't understand the nuances of cross-border investment regulations. There was that word again, clean, and the casual dismissal of my intelligence, as if building a multi-million-dollar company from scratch required no understanding of finance, regulations, or complex business law. I'll need to meet with Felix directly. Sit down, review the business plans, understand the investment strategy, see the regulatory requirements he's referring to. That's not how legitimate international business works, Dad. Felix deals with serious investors, institutional capital, family offices that understand discretion and sophistication. Not contractors who got lucky with local real estate and think that qualifies them to understand European finance. Contractors who got lucky. Every foundation I'd poured, every beam I'd specified, every client relationship I'd built through honest work and delivered promises, reduced to luck. Every late night I'd spent learning zoning law, building codes, environmental regulations, financial planning, dismissed as inadequate for understanding Felix's sophisticated world. Then we'll wait until I can understand the investment properly. The trust isn't going anywhere, Caroline. It will still be there when we can review this thoroughly. Fine. But don't blame me when Felix moves forward with partners who actually understand opportunity and commitment. Don't blame me when this chance disappears because you were too provincial to recognize real wealth when you saw it. She hung up without saying goodbye, without I love you, without any acknowledgement that she was asking me to hand over her entire inheritance to a man I barely knew for a business opportunity I wasn't allowed to examine. I sat in my office looking at the architectural models of buildings I'd designed, schools where thousands of children had learned to read, homes where families had grown up safe and happy, community centers where people had found jobs and hope and connection. The awards on my walls from the American Institute of Architects, recognition for design excellence and community impact, the family photos where 3-year-old Caroline wore my hard hat and grinned like she owned the world. Felix needed clean capital, and my daughter was willing to cut me out of their lives to get it for him. But what she didn't know was that her father, the provincial contractor, had learned a few things about due diligence over the years, and something about Felix's story wasn't adding up. I called Elena Rodriguez the next morning at 8 a.m. sharp. She'd been handling Meridian's legal affairs for 15 years, and more importantly, she'd watched Caroline grow up. She'd been at Caroline's high school graduation, her Stanford send-off party, every major milestone in my daughter's life. Smart as hell, thorough as a federal investigation, and protective as a mother bear when it came to people she cared about. Vincent, you sound concerned. What's happening? I need you to run a complete background check on Felix Blackwood. International, if necessary. Caroline wants to release her entire trust fund for his business venture, and something feels wrong about the whole situation. Elena was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted into full lawyer mode, the tone she used when she'd found something that could destroy lives. Vincent, in 15 years of handling trust funds and estate planning, I've never seen a legitimate business opportunity that couldn't wait 30 days for proper due diligence and documentation review. That's exactly what I thought. But Caroline is convinced I'm too unsophisticated to understand Felix's world of international finance. What kind of business is he claiming to operate? Sustainable luxury hospitality in Switzerland, needs clean capital for European regulatory compliance, keeps talking about sophisticated investors and international banking requirements that I supposedly couldn't understand. Clean capital, Elena repeated the phrase slowly, like she was tasting something bitter. Vincent, legitimate businesses don't typically emphasize how clean their capital requirements are. That's language you hear when someone is distinguishing legal money from other kinds. Run the check, Elena. I need to know exactly who my daughter is planning to marry. Elena called back 4 hours later. I was in the middle of reviewing blueprints for a new affordable housing project, trying to lose myself in the familiar rhythm of structural calculations and building codes. Her voice was different when she spoke. Careful, professional, the tone she used when delivering news that would change everything. Vincent, we need to meet in person immediately. Not over the phone, not in your office, somewhere completely private. Just tell me what you found, Elena. Felix Blackwood has an active Interpol warrant. Number IC 2019-45803. International money laundering investigation. $45 million traced through Swiss banking accounts over the past 5 years. He's been a fugitive since 2019. Well, the room seemed to tilt around me like a building settling on an unstable foundation. My daughter wasn't just dating a gold digger or a fortune hunter. She was engaged to an international criminal who'd been running from law enforcement for half a decade. Elena, there has to be some mistake. Felix talks about European banking regulations, international business compliance. He seems to understand legitimate finance. Vincent, he understands finance because he's been stealing it. The Interpol warrant lists resort development projects in Montenegro, Switzerland, and the Cayman Islands, all fronts for laundering drug cartel money. $45 million, Vincent. That's not some minor business dispute or regulatory misunderstanding. I thought about Caroline's insistence on clean capital, her casual knowledge of European banking regulations that she shouldn't have known, her dismissal of my questions as irrelevant and unsophisticated. Elena, what if Caroline already knows? What if she's not Felix's victim? What if she's his partner? Then she's looking at conspiracy charges under federal RICO statutes. 25 years minimum, Vincent. If she transfers trust fund money to him knowing about his criminal background, she becomes an accessory to international money laundering. The possibility that my daughter was willingly helping a fugitive launder money was almost worse than thinking she was being deceived. But it explained her sudden shame about our family, her insistence that I stay in the background, her eagerness to distance herself from everything I'd built. Elena, what do I do now? First, we freeze every account she has access to immediately. Trust fund, monthly allowance, company credit cards, everything. Then we involve federal authorities. Vincent, if Caroline is planning to transfer money to an international fugitive, we have maybe days before she destroys her entire life. And I hung up and stared at the family photos on my desk, trying to understand how I'd failed so completely as a father that my daughter would choose criminal conspiracy over the life I'd built for her. But failure wasn't the right word, because what Elena had discovered meant I hadn't failed at all. I'd been fighting an enemy I didn't even know existed. The next morning, I made 4 phone calls that would change everything. First to Elena, authorizing her to file emergency injunctions, freezing all trust fund assets, and Caroline's access to company accounts. Second to Thomas Sterling, the most thorough private investigator in Boston, with instructions to conduct 24-hour surveillance on Felix and Caroline both. Third to my bank, placing fraud alerts on every account connected to Caroline's name. Fourth, to Detective Harrison at FBI Financial Crimes, because Elena was right. If my daughter was planning to help an international fugitive, federal authorities needed to know immediately. Within 8 hours, $73 million in total assets were locked down tighter than Fort Knox. Caroline's monthly allowance, the trust fund, her company credit cards, even her access to the company car, everything stopped. If she was planning to finance an international criminal, she'd have to find another way to do it. Thomas called that evening with his initial surveillance findings, his voice tight with the kind of professional concern that made my stomach drop. Vincent, I've been watching Felix for 14 hours straight. He's made 22 phone calls to numbers that don't exist in any directory I can access. Swiss country codes, encrypted connections, routing through servers I can't trace. This isn't some guy planning a legitimate hotel business. What else have you observed? He's staying at the Four Seasons under a diplomatic passport from Montenegro. Problem is, Montenegro doesn't issue diplomatic passports to private citizens engaged in commercial business. It's either stolen, forged, or he's lying about who he really is. Can you continue surveillance? Already planned on it. But Vincent, there's something else you need to know. Caroline met with Felix 3 times today. Once at his hotel suite, once at a private banking office I've never heard of, once at a law firm that specializes in international asset protection. They're not acting like a couple planning a wedding. They're acting like business partners planning something that requires significant legal protection. Detective Harrison called an hour later with information that confirmed my worst fears and then made them infinitely worse. Mr. Campbell, we've been tracking Felix Blackwood for 18 months as part of a larger international money laundering investigation. Resort development projects that exist only on paper, Swiss accounts that funnel money from South American drug cartels, investment schemes that disappear millions of dollars at a time. Is my daughter in danger? Mr. Campbell, if your daughter transfers money to Felix knowing about his criminal background, she's not in danger. She's in federal custody. Conspiracy to launder money, aiding and abetting a fugitive. Conspiracy to defraud banking institutions. We're talking about 25 years in federal prison. What if she doesn't know? Based on the surveillance reports we've been receiving, your daughter has been present at meetings with known money laundering attorneys, has been photographed entering buildings that house offshore banking services, and has been observed reviewing documents that appear to be financial in nature. Either she's the most unlucky, innocent person in America, or she knows exactly what she's involved in. That night, Caroline called. Her voice was different, sharper, more controlled, with an edge I'd never heard before but recognized from Felix's conversations. Dad, what did you do to the accounts? Felix tried to verify my financial capabilities today and discovered everything has been frozen. I protected your future, Caroline. Elena found some very concerning information about Felix's background and current legal status. Elena doesn't understand international business any more than you do. You've embarrassed me professionally, Dad. Felix is questioning whether I can deliver on the commitments I've made to his investment partners. Deliver on commitments, not provide investment capital or support our shared future. Deliver on commitments, like she was fulfilling a business contract rather than planning a marriage. Caroline, come home tonight. Let's discuss this properly, face to face, like family. Family? Dad, I'm 28 years old. I don't have a home with you anymore. I have a life with Felix. A future that extends beyond your limited understanding of how real wealth operates in the modern world. But she did come home. The next afternoon, Caroline let herself into my Beacon Hill house, using the key. I'd never asked her to return. I was waiting in the study, the room where I'd helped her with algebra homework, where she'd shown me her Stanford acceptance letter, where she'd told me about every boyfriend since middle school, where I'd taught her to balance a checkbook and understand investment principles. We need to get the accounts unfrozen immediately, she said without preamble. No hello, no acknowledgement that she hadn't been here in 3 months, no recognition that this was the room where I'd read her thousands of bedtime stories. Caroline, please sit down. We need to talk about Felix. I don't have time for one of your lectures, Dad. Felix is under pressure from his European investment partners, real people with real money who don't appreciate delays caused by American provincial banking paranoia. Honey, I know about the Interpol warrant. For just a moment, Caroline's perfect composure cracked completely. Her eyes widened. She took half a step backward, and her hand moved to her throat like she was having trouble breathing. But she recovered quickly, too quickly. I don't know what you're talking about. Felix Blackwood, wanted for money laundering $45 million. 5 countries are looking for him, Caroline. 5 countries want him in prison. That's impossible. Felix is successful, established, sophisticated. He went to the finest schools in Europe. His family owns properties across 3 countries. But even as she said it, I could hear the doubt creeping into her voice. The careful phrasing, like she was reciting a script she'd memorized, but never quite believed. Show me his business registration in Switzerland. Show me one resort he's actually developed. Show me anything that proves he's what he claims to be. Caroline sat down heavily in the leather chair where she'd curled up to read when she was little. For just a moment, she looked like that child again, confused, scared, in over her head. Dad, even if there are some complications with his past business dealings, people can change. Felix loves me. He's trying to build something legitimate now. With your money. With our money. We're partners, Dad. Real partners in building something significant. Partners in what, exactly? Money laundering? Caroline's face hardened again, the vulnerability disappearing behind a mask of cold determination that looked nothing like the daughter I'd raised. Partners in a future that doesn't include being embarrassed by a father who can't see beyond his own limitations and prejudices. She stood up, smoothing her designer dress, another piece of clothing that cost more than most people's monthly rent. You have 48 hours to release those funds, Dad, or Felix will be forced to pursue alternative solutions. Solutions that won't be pleasant for you or your precious little company. Is that a threat, Caroline? It's a reality check. Felix has resources and connections you can't imagine. People who owe him favors, relationships that extend beyond your small New England world. Release the accounts, Dad, before this gets ugly for everyone involved. She walked out without another word, leaving me alone in a room full of memories of the daughter I thought I'd raised. The daughter who was now threatening to destroy everything I'd built rather than abandon her criminal fiancé. Felix called the next morning at exactly 8 a.m. I'd been expecting it. Had actually been surprised he'd waited this long to contact me directly. When powerful people feel cornered, they always try to negotiate before they resort to violence. Mr. Campbell, I believe we need to discuss our situation like civilized, reasonable men. His accent was thicker over the phone, more pronounced. The European sophistication that Caroline found so appealing suddenly sounded calculated, performed, like an actor who'd been playing the same role for so long he'd forgotten his real voice. I think we do, starting with why you're using a forged diplomatic passport. A pause. Long enough to tell me Thomas Sterling's surveillance intelligence was accurate and that Felix wasn't expecting me to know about it. Mr. Campbell, I think you've been misinformed by people who don't understand the complexity of international business credentials and diplomatic courtesies. Or perhaps I've been informed by Interpol warrant number IC 2019-45893. The silence stretched much longer this time. When Felix spoke again, the polished charm was completely gone, replaced by something much colder and more calculating. Mr. Campbell, you're interfering in business relationships and commitments that extend far beyond your provincial understanding of how international finance operates. Caroline has made specific promises to serious people who don't appreciate delays or complications. What kind of promises? The kind that don't simply disappear because an overprotective father decides to freeze bank accounts. I have investors, Mr. Campbell, serious people with significant resources who don't tolerate delays or excuses from anyone. Then maybe you should have thought of that before involving my daughter in your money laundering operation. Money laundering? Felix laughed, but there was no humor in it, only contempt. Mr. Campbell, you have no idea what you're interfering with. Caroline understands the opportunities available to people willing to think globally, to move beyond the limitations of American small-town mentality. She understands that you're a fugitive from international law enforcement. She understands that sometimes the most profitable opportunities exist in areas that provincial minds can't appreciate or comprehend. Like drug money? Like international capital that requires proper structuring and documentation to meet European banking compliance standards. Caroline has committed to providing clean investment capital for legitimate business development. There was that word again. Clean. Every time someone mentioned clean capital, it sounded more suspicious, more like a code word for something illegal. You mean my daughter has agreed to help you launder $45 million in cartel money? I mean your daughter has agreed to participate in sophisticated international business relationships? that will provide her with wealth and opportunities beyond anything your little architectural firm could ever offer. But you still need my signature to access her trust fund. Actually, Mr. Campbell, we don't. Caroline provided power of attorney documentation last week to expedite the investment process. We were simply being courteous by including you in the conversation. My blood went cold. Power of attorney meant Felix could access Caroline's trust fund without my approval or signature. The account freeze was the only thing standing between him and $12.5 million. You're lying. Mr. Campbell, would you like to speak with Caroline? She's right here with me, and I think she has something she'd like to explain to you about her choices and priorities. The phone shifted, and then I heard my daughter's voice, but it sounded different. Harder, more certain, like she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Dad, Felix is trying to be reasonable and include you in our plans despite your paranoid behavior. But his European investment partners won't wait forever, and they won't tolerate continued interference from people who don't understand international business. Caroline, listen to me carefully. Felix is a fugitive from international law enforcement. He's using you to launder money from drug cartels. Once he gets what he needs, he'll disappear and leave you facing federal conspiracy charges. Dad, you're embarrassing yourself. Felix isn't some criminal. He's a sophisticated businessman dealing with complex European regulatory requirements. The kind of complexity you've never had to navigate from your small New England construction bubble. Her voice carried a contempt that cut deeper than any of Felix's threats. 28 years of bedtime stories, homework help, soccer practices, college tuition, and unconditional love, dismissed as a small New England construction bubble. Caroline, if you transfer money to Felix using power of attorney, you'll be facing federal conspiracy charges. 25 years in prison, honey, your whole life destroyed. The only thing threatening to destroy my life is your refusal to trust my judgment and accept my choices. Felix has excellent lawyers, Dad, real international finance attorneys who handle sophisticated legal structures, not small-town legal aid. Then why does he need clean capital, Caroline? The question hung in the air for several seconds before she answered, and when she did, her voice was different, harder, more certain, more committed to a path I couldn't follow. Because sometimes the most profitable opportunities exist in areas that small minds can't understand or appreciate. Because real wealth requires courage to move beyond conventional thinking. Real wealth requires honesty, Caroline. It requires building something legitimate rather than stealing from other people. Felix's voice came back on the line, and I could hear Caroline in the background, but she wasn't protesting anymore. She was agreeing with him. Mr. Campbell, you have until tomorrow evening to release the account freeze. After that, we'll be forced to pursue alternative methods that you won't find pleasant. Is that a threat? It's a practical reality. Caroline has signed power of attorney documents. Our legal team has identified several irregularities in Meridian Architecture's tax filings that might interest the IRS. Sometimes complex audits can take years to resolve and cost millions in legal fees. You're threatening to frame me for tax evasion. I'm explaining how the world really works when you interfere with serious business relationships. Caroline understands. She knows that sometimes you have to choose between old loyalties and new opportunities. I was quiet for a moment, thinking about Caroline's power of attorney signature, about Felix's threats, about the daughter I'd raised choosing to help a criminal rather than trust her father. Let me ask you something, Felix. Do you actually love my daughter, or is she just useful? Mr. Campbell, love is a luxury that people like Caroline and myself have evolved beyond. We understand partnership, mutual benefit, shared opportunity. Sentimental attachments are for people who can't afford to think strategically. And you think Caroline agrees with that? Caroline chose me over you, Mr. Campbell. That should answer your question about what she values more. He hung up, leaving me with the dial tone and the realization that my daughter hadn't just chosen Felix over me. She'd chosen criminal conspiracy over everything I'd taught her about integrity, honesty, and building something worth keeping. But what Felix and Caroline didn't know was that their conversation had just been recorded, and Detective Harrison was already moving to the next phase of the investigation. The next 48 hours were the longest and most terrifying of my life. Felix's threat about IRS irregularities materialized within hours, An official notice claiming substantial discrepancies in Meridian's international consulting fees and requiring immediate comprehensive audit. Fees that didn't exist, from consulting work I'd never performed, with companies I'd never heard of in countries I'd never visited. The forged IRS documentation was sophisticated enough to fool most people, complete with case numbers, agent contact information, and penalties that would have bankrupted Meridian within months. Federal agencies don't appreciate having their authority forged, but explaining that would require time I didn't have and resources I couldn't spare, while Caroline was planning to destroy her life. But Felix had made one crucial miscalculation. I'd been documenting everything for 18 months. The paranoid habit of a careful engineer, Elena called it. When Caroline first brought Felix home and something felt off about his stories, too polished, too perfect, too vague about specific details, I'd started keeping meticulous records. Every phone conversation logged with timestamps, every meeting documented with follow-up notes, every financial transaction tracked in duplicate systems. Not because I was suspicious of my daughter, but because 34 years of building projects had taught me to identify structural integrity problems before they became catastrophic failures. When a building starts showing stress cracks, you don't wait for it to collapse. You document everything and plan your response. I had recordings of Caroline's casual knowledge of Swiss banking regulations that she shouldn't have known, photographs of Felix entering buildings that housed offshore financial services companies, copies of Caroline's bank statements showing deposits from accounts I couldn't trace or verify. 18 months of watching my daughter evolve from someone I'd raised with clear values to someone I didn't recognize. Elena worked around the clock with her federal contacts to fast-track evidence review and authentication. Thomas Sterling provided surveillance documentation that painted a detailed picture of systematic criminal activity spanning multiple countries. And Detective Harrison from FBI Financial Crimes confirmed what I'd feared most. Caroline wasn't just helping Felix launder money. She was actively managing the American side of his international operation. "Vincent," Detective Harrison called Wednesday evening, "we need your cooperation for a controlled operation. Felix is planning to execute the power of attorney transfer by Friday morning, with or without resolving the account freeze. We can arrest him for the forged IRS documents, but that won't touch the larger money laundering operation. What do you need from me?" Wear a wire, meet with Felix and Caroline, get them to explain exactly how they plan to use your daughter's trust fund, how the money laundering operation works, what other victims they're targeting. Massachusetts law allows single-party consent recording for felony investigations. And if they realize I'm wearing a wire, then you'll discover exactly how dangerous Felix really is, and Caroline will have to choose between protecting her father or protecting her criminal partner. I spent Thursday night staring at family photos spread across my kitchen table, trying to understand how I'd failed so completely as a father. Caroline at 5 years old, gap-toothed and proud of the birdhouse we'd built together in my workshop. Caroline at 10, insisting I teach her to use my drafting tools so she could design houses for her dolls. Caroline at 16, rolling her eyes at my jokes, but still hugging me goodnight every evening. Caroline at 22, Stanford graduation day, telling everyone who would listen that I was the best father any girl could ask for. Somewhere between that proud, loving girl and the woman who was threatening federal prosecution to protect her criminal fiancé, I'd lost my daughter completely. But I still had a choice. Let her destroy her life to protect Felix, or force her to face the consequences of the choices she was making. Friday morning, I called Caroline and told her I'd reconsidered the account freeze situation. I was ready to discuss releasing the trust fund, ready to meet with Felix and understand their investment plans. The wire device, hidden in my jacket pocket, was no bigger than a shirt button, but it felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Detective Harrison had explained the technical details. Single-party consent meant I could legally record any conversation I was part of. The device would transmit everything to FBI surveillance teams positioned around the Four Seasons. If Felix or Caroline incriminated themselves, discussing money laundering, international fugitive status, or conspiracy to defraud financial institutions, federal agents would have everything they needed for prosecution. Walking into that hotel suite felt like entering a building I'd designed but never wanted to construct. A structure built on lies, supported by manipulation, destined to collapse and destroy everyone inside. But sometimes you have to enter a burning building to save the people trapped inside, even when those people helped start the fire. The Four Seasons suite overlooked Boston Harbor, through floor-to-ceiling windows that probably cost more per night than most people earned in a month. Felix answered the door wearing a Swiss-made watch that could have funded a year of college tuition, his smile perfectly calibrated to suggest old money confidence and European sophistication. "Vincent," he extended his hand like we were old friends meeting for lunch. "I'm genuinely pleased you've decided to approach this situation with more flexibility and understanding." I shook his hand and noticed everything Thomas Sterling had reported. The manicure, the soft skin of someone who'd never worked with his hands, the expensive cologne that couldn't quite mask an underlying nervousness. Everything about Felix was perfect, polished, empty, like a movie set that looks real from a distance but falls apart when you examine it closely. Carolyn was seated on the leather sofa, looking elegant and untouchable in a way that reminded me of her mother, but with a coldness Sarah had never possessed. Her designer outfit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and she wore it like armor against any criticism of the choices she was making. "I want to understand exactly what you're planning to do with Caroline's inheritance money," I said, settling into the chair across from them. The positioning felt deliberate, me isolated on one side, them united as partners on the other. "Our money," Caroline corrected sharply. "And it's not just about money, Dad. It's about building something significant, something that extends far beyond your limited worldview and small-scale thinking. Explain it to me. Help me understand what I've been missing." Felix gestured expansively like he was presenting a business plan to potential investors. "Vincent, the luxury hospitality industry in Europe operates under completely different regulatory frameworks than anything you're familiar with here in the States. Capital must be properly sourced, thoroughly documented, and carefully structured before it can be invested in certain high-level opportunities." "You mean it has to be clean?" "I mean it has to be legitimate and properly documented. Caroline's trust fund represents generational family wealth, the kind of established capital that European banking institutions prefer for large-scale development projects." "Development projects like what, specifically?" Caroline leaned forward, her eyes bright with excitement that reminded me of when she was 12 and explaining a school project she was passionate about. "Luxury resorts, Dad. Exclusive properties in Switzerland, Montenegro, locations where people with real wealth vacation and invest. The kind of sophisticated business that generates returns you couldn't possibly imagine from your small-scale residential construction projects." Small-scale residential construction. She was dismissing homes I'd designed for young families, affordable housing that provided shelter for hundreds of people, community buildings that served thousands of residents, reduced to small scale because they didn't generate the kind of profit that impressed her anymore. "What kind of returns are we discussing?" Felix and Caroline exchanged a quick look, practiced, rehearsed, the glance of partners who discussed this conversation extensively. "Conservative projections indicate 200 to 300% return on investment within 18 months, Felix said smoothly. "But that's only achievable with proper capital placement through established European financial channels. Channels that require clean investment capital. Channels that require legitimate, properly documented investment," Caroline corrected, but her tone carried an edge of impatience. "Dad, you keep using words like they mean something suspicious. Felix is building legitimate business relationships with serious European investors and financial institutions. European institutions that don't appreciate interference from overprotective American fathers?" Felix's smile never wavered, but something shifted behind his eyes. "Vincent, let me be completely transparent with you. Caroline's trust fund isn't just an investment opportunity. It's her admission ticket into a community of people who operate at financial levels you've never experienced or imagined. An admission ticket for what? For access to real wealth, Dad, Caroline said, her voice carrying the same contempt I'd heard on the phone. Not contractor money, not local business success, not community recognition. International wealth, the kind of money that buys real influence, opens doors to exclusive opportunities, changes everything about how you live and who you can become. That's when I understood the full scope of what was happening. This wasn't just about money laundering or even criminal conspiracy. This was about Caroline's profound shame over who I was, what I'd built, and where she'd come from. She wasn't just helping Felix launder money. She was buying her way out of being my daughter. Caroline, you're talking about washing dirty money through your trust fund to gain access to criminal financial networks. I'm talking about transforming generational wealth into something truly significant, she snapped. Something better than small-town architectural contracts, community center ribbon cuttings, and provincial recognition for local projects. Something that could result in 25 years in federal prison. Felix stood up abruptly, his carefully maintained composure finally showing cracks. Vincent, you're operating from a position of complete ignorance about how sophisticated international finance actually functions. Caroline understands that sometimes you have to move beyond provincial limitations and conventional thinking. I understand that my daughter is helping you launder $45 million in drug cartel money. The silence in the room was absolute. Caroline's face went white, and Felix's hand moved instinctively toward his phone. Dad? Caroline's voice was deadly quiet. Felix isn't laundering anything. He's developing legitimate business opportunities that require proper capital structure and European regulatory compliance. They're with money from Swiss accounts tied to South American drug trafficking operations. That's completely false and slanderous, Felix said, but I could hear panic creeping into his voice despite his attempts at control. Then explain why Interpol has an active warrant for your arrest. Caroline stood up so quickly she knocked over her coffee cup, expensive porcelain shattering against the marble table. Dad, what are you talking about? What warrant? Tell her, Felix. Tell her about warrant number IC 2019-4823. Tell her about the $45 million you've been washing through fake resort developments. Tell her about the prison sentence you're running from. Felix's carefully constructed facade collapsed completely. The polished accent became more pronounced, defensive. Caroline, your father has been listening to misinformation from people who don't understand the complexity of international business disputes and regulatory disagreements. International business disputes don't result in Interpol fugitive warrants, I said quietly. Caroline turned to look at Felix, really look at him, for the first time since I'd walked into the room. Felix, tell me exactly what he's talking about. Explain this to me right now. Caroline, darling, your father is trying to sabotage our future because he can't accept that you've outgrown his limitations and chosen something better. But Caroline wasn't looking at Felix anymore. She was looking at me, and for just a moment, I saw the little girl who used to ask me to check under her bed for monsters before she could fall asleep. Dad, tell me exactly what you found. Everything. So I did, and with every detail I shared, I watched my daughter realize that the monster she'd been planning to marry was absolutely real. Interpol warrant IC 2019-458923, I said quietly, watching Caroline's face as each word hit her. $45 million laundered through fake resort development projects in Montenegro, Switzerland, and the Cayman Islands. Drug cartel money, Caroline. Money that comes from destroying families, funding violence, ruining communities. Caroline sank back onto the sofa like I'd physically struck her. Felix, tell me this isn't true. Look me in the eyes and tell me this is some kind of mistake. Felix was pacing now, his polished exterior completely gone, replaced by something desperate and calculating. Caroline, these are technical violations, regulatory disagreements that have been blown completely out of proportion by jurisdictions that don't understand modern international finance and cross-border investment structures. Technical violations don't result in international fugitive warrants. I pulled out my phone and showed Caroline the Interpol listing. 5 countries want him in prison, honey. This isn't a regulatory disagreement. This is international criminal conspiracy. Caroline stared at the screen, her hands shaking as she read the details. Felix, you told me you had some minor business disputes in Europe. You said it was just banking bureaucracy and regulatory complications. It is banking bureaucracy, amplified and exaggerated by small-minded officials who don't appreciate innovative financial structures and international business development. Innovative financial structures. I couldn't keep the disgust out of my voice. He means taking drug money, money from cartels that murder people, destroy families, corrupt entire communities, and making it look like legitimate business investment through your trust fund, Caroline. That's not what... Caroline's voice was getting smaller, like she was disappearing into herself as the reality crashed over her. Caroline, Felix sat down next to her, taking her hands in his. Your father is using scare tactics and exaggeration because he can't bear to see you succeed beyond his limited world. Yes, there are some regulatory complications in Europe, but they're completely manageable. Once we establish proper capital flow through your trust fund, I can resolve everything. By making my daughter an accessory to international money laundering, by providing Caroline with access to the kind of wealth and opportunities that transform lives completely. Caroline pulled her hands away from Felix. Show me the business registrations. Show me the actual resort properties. Show me the legitimate investors. Show me something real that proves what you're telling me. Felix's face went through a series of expressions. Panic, calculation, desperation, and something that looked like contempt. Caroline, darling, sometimes in sophisticated business relationships, you have to trust your partners completely. Doubt and questioning destroy the kind of exclusive opportunities I'm offering you. That's not an answer, Felix. It's the only answer you're going to get from me. Now, are you with me or not? I watched my daughter's face change as she realized Felix wasn't going to prove his legitimacy because he couldn't. 28 years of teaching her to think critically, ask hard questions, and never accept easy answers without verification, finally paying off when it mattered most. Dad, Caroline's voice was barely a whisper. What happens if I've already signed legal documents giving Felix access to my accounts? What exactly did you sign, honey? Power of attorney for the trust fund. Last week. Felix said it was just to expedite the transfer process once you approved the investment. My heart stopped. Power of attorney meant Felix could access Caroline's trust fund without my signature or approval. The account freeze was literally the only thing standing between him and $12.5 million. Felix was smiling now, the polished charm returning as he realized he still held the winning hand. Caroline, you see, we don't actually need your father's cooperation or approval. The power of attorney gives us everything we need to move forward with our plans. Move forward with money laundering, I said. Move forward with our future together, Felix corrected smoothly. Caroline, you can stay trapped in your father's small world of construction contracts and community projects, or you can trust me to show you what real international wealth looks like. Caroline looked back and forth between us, the father who'd raised her with honest work and unconditional love, and the man who'd convinced her to be ashamed of everything I'd built. Caroline, I said quietly, you can revoke power of attorney any time before it's executed. But once that money moves into Felix's accounts, you become an accessory to federal crimes. 25 years in prison, honey. Your whole life destroyed for someone else's criminal operation. She looked at Felix with new eyes. Promise me this is legitimate. Look me in the eye and promise me you're not laundering drug money. Felix looked her directly in the eye and smiled. Caroline, I promise you that everything I've told you is exactly what you need to know to make the right decision. It was the perfect non-answer, delivered with absolute confidence. And finally, after months of manipulation and lies, my daughter heard it for what it really was. Caroline stood up slowly, testing whether her legs would support her as her entire world restructured itself around the truth. I need to revoke the power of attorney immediately. Now, Caroline, don't let paranoia and fear make life decisions for you, Felix said, but there was an edge to his voice now, something dangerous and desperate bleeding through his polished facade. It's not paranoia, Felix. It's clarity. Caroline's voice was getting stronger with each word. Dad, can Elena revoke the power of attorney today? Already handled, I said, pulling out my phone. Elena filed the revocation paperwork an hour ago. The power of attorney is legally void. Felix went very still, his entire body language changing as he processed what I'd just told him. What do you mean, an hour ago? I looked at my daughter, who was finally seeing clearly for the first time in months, and made the decision that would change everything between us forever. Caroline, I've been recording this entire conversation. The silence in the room was deafening. Caroline's face went white again, but this time it was relief, not shock. Felix stood up fast, his hand moving toward his jacket, in a gesture that made me grateful for the FBI surveillance team positioned around the hotel. Vincent, you have no idea what you've just done to very dangerous people. I've documented a full confession to international money laundering, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempted manipulation of a trust fund for criminal purposes. You recorded us without our consent. Massachusetts is a single-party consent state for felony investigations, and FBI Financial Crimes has been listening to every word through the wire I've been wearing since I walked in here. Felix's carefully constructed world collapsed in real time. The polished European accent disappeared completely, replaced by something harder, cruder, more desperate. Caroline, you stupid girl, do you have any idea what you've just cost me? What you've cost both of us? That's when my daughter's spine snapped straight, and I saw the woman I'd actually raised her to be. What I've cost you? Felix, you were planning to use my inheritance to wash drug money. You were going to make me an accessory to federal crimes, destroy my entire life, and you think I owe you something? You owe me everything. I took you from being the embarrassing daughter of a small-time contractor and gave you access to real power, real wealth, real sophistication. By lying to me about everything. By showing you possibilities your narrow-minded father could never imagine or provide. Caroline turned to look at me, and for the first time in months, I saw my actual daughter instead of the stranger she'd become. Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry. I don't know how I let him convince me that you were the problem, that what we had wasn't enough. Honey, you don't need to apologize to me right now. You need to focus on protecting yourself and understanding what happens next. Felix was pacing again, his phone in his hand, making calculations that probably involved escape routes and emergency plans. This isn't over, Vincent. Caroline signed documents, made commitments to serious people. My associates don't simply walk away from business deals because of recording devices and family drama. Your associates are about to have much bigger problems than Caroline's trust fund, I said calmly. FBI Financial Crimes has been tracking your money laundering operation for 18 months. This conversation was just the final piece of evidence they needed for prosecution. The hotel room door opened at that exact moment, and Detective Harrison walked in with 3 federal agents wearing FBI jackets. Felix's face cycled through shock, rage, desperation, and resignation in the space of maybe 5 seconds. Felix Blackwood, you're under arrest for international money laundering, conspiracy to commit fraud, impersonating federal officials, and conspiracy to violate the Bank Secrecy Act. As they handcuffed Felix, he looked at Caroline with pure contempt and hatred. You chose small-town mediocrity over real opportunity. Don't expect me to feel sorry for you when you're stuck in your father's pathetic little world for the rest of your life. Caroline watched them lead Felix away, then turned back to me with tears streaming down her face. Dad, what happens to me now? Now you learn the difference between wealth and worth, I said, and we figure out how to rebuild what we almost lost. Detective Harrison stayed behind to brief us on legal procedures and next steps. Caroline would need to testify about Felix's fraud attempts and manipulation tactics, but her cooperation and the fact that she'd revoked the power of attorney before any money transferred meant she wouldn't face criminal charges. Mr. Campbell, Detective Harrison said, your 18 months of documentation made this case possible. Without your recordings and evidence collection, we never could have proven that Caroline wasn't a willing participant in the money laundering operation. After Detective Harrison left, Caroline and I sat in that expensive hotel suite, looking out at Boston Harbor, where I'd taught her to sail when she was 12 years old. Dad, how long have you known the truth about Felix? That he was a criminal? Since Elena ran the background check? That you were ashamed of who I am and what I built? Much longer than that? Caroline started crying then. not polite tears designed to preserve makeup, but honest, devastating sobs of someone whose entire world had collapsed and was slowly rebuilding itself. "I don't know why I thought you weren't enough," she whispered. "I don't know why I thought what we had together wasn't good enough." "Because someone very skilled at psychological manipulation convinced you that love should feel like shame," I said. "That's what people like Felix do, honey. They find the small doubts we all carry and weaponize them against us." I held my daughter while she cried, and for the first time in months, it felt like she was really home. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my office at Meridian Architecture, reviewing blueprints for the Caroline Campbell Foundation's first major project, a residential facility for women escaping financial abuse and manipulation. Caroline insisted on using her mother's name for the foundation, funded entirely with the trust fund that Felix never managed to steal. Felix was extradited to Switzerland 4 months ago. 25 years in a Swiss federal prison, no possibility of parole, no appeal options. The $45 million he'd been laundering was seized and returned to the communities destroyed by the drug cartels he'd been serving. Caroline testified at his trial via secure video link, her voice steady and clear as she described how he'd systematically manipulated her shame about our family background into a weapon against both of us. The trial revealed the full scope of Felix's operation. Resort properties that existed only on paper, Swiss bank accounts that funneled money from South American cartels, investment schemes that had victimized dozens of wealthy families across 3 continents. Caroline wasn't his first target, just his most successful one, until she wasn't. Caroline works for the foundation now, earning $42,000 a year instead of the $50,000 monthly allowance she used to receive without question. She lives in a modest 1-bedroom apartment in Cambridge, drives a 3-year-old Honda Civic, shops at Target instead of Nordstrom, and seems genuinely lighter somehow, like she'd been carrying invisible weight for years. "Dad," she said last week over dinner at our kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped her with homework for 15 years, "I need to ask you something important." "Anything, honey." "Why did you give me so much money all those years? Why didn't you make me earn it, work for it, understand its value?" I thought about that question for a long time before answering, because I was terrified that if I didn't give you everything I possibly could, you might not stay. After losing your mother so suddenly, the idea of losing you too seemed unbearable. But I almost left anyway, because I never learned to value what you built, what you taught me, what you sacrificed. I just learned to expect it, and then resent it when it wasn't enough to impress people I shouldn't have wanted to impress. We both made serious mistakes, Caroline. The important thing is we figured it out before it was too late to fix. Caroline reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm proud of you, Dad. I'm proud of what you built, how you built it, who you are, and where we come from. I should have said that years ago instead of letting someone convince me to be ashamed." The foundation has helped 68 women in 6 months. Women who, like Caroline, had been convinced by predatory partners that their families were holding them back, that love should feel like shame, that they needed to choose between loyalty and opportunity. Caroline runs the counseling programs, helping other women recognize the manipulation tactics that nearly destroyed her own life. She's dating someone new now, David Morrison, a public school teacher who makes $43,000 a year and drives a pickup truck that's older than my Honda. He treats Caroline like she's precious without making her feel ashamed of where she comes from or who raised her. He's never once suggested that her background needs upgrading or that I'm an embarrassment to be around. The trust fund sits untouched now, earning steady interest until Caroline turns 40. I want to be absolutely sure I'm making decisions based on values and principles, not access to easy money, she told Elena last month. I want to know that what I choose because it's been right and honest, not because it's comfortable or impressive. I've learned something crucial these past months. Pride isn't about what you accumulate, what you build, or how much money you have access to. Real pride comes from protecting your principles when it would be easier to compromise them. From choosing integrity over convenience, truth over comfort, justice over keeping false peace. My daughter and I are building something together now, not houses or companies or trust funds, but a relationship based on mutual respect instead of financial obligation, genuine admiration instead of entitled expectation. It's the most important structure I've ever designed, and for the first time in years, I know it's built on a foundation solid enough to last. If this story resonates with anyone struggling with toxic family dynamics or financial manipulation, please share it. Sometimes we all need reminding that choosing integrity over convenience isn't just the right thing to do. It's the only way to build something genuinely worth keeping.